I'd been playing around my hometown, my birthplace of Wakefield, for quite a while before I did any proper recording. And it was in the late 60s I got involved with a local kind of almost a hippie commune that had a little recording setup using a 2-track stereo machine, and they were putting out albums of local folk singers. And I got involved doing the odd bit of guitar for them, and eventually they said, why don't you do an album of your own? And I wrote some songs and went into this place in Wakefield, and we recorded them on a 2-track machine, and a local record store funded the recording costs, and we pressed just, I think, 300 copies, and one of those found its way into John Peel's hands, and he got in touch and said, if you listen to my radio show this evening, I'll be playing something from Northern Dream, which was the title of the album, Northern Dream. And in fact he played the entire album, both sides of it, non-stop. Just, spoke in between while he turned it over and said, here's side 2, and raved about it. And then the next thing that happened was EMI Records got in touch with me because they heard the broadcast with John Peel playing the album. And they invited me down to their headquarters, which was in Manchester Square at that time, and said, we'd like to do an album with you. We'd like to re-record Northern Dream in a proper studio and put some good musicians with you and so on. But by this time I'd formed a band called Bebop Deluxe, only just formed. We were literally, I think, 2 weeks old when I went down to see EMI. And I said, well, I've got a band now, I don't really want to do the Northern Dream material again, that's already sort of a year and a bit old. What about recording the band? So they said, well, we'll have to come up and have a listen. So they came up to Yorkshire and we did a local gig, and EMI said, we don't think the band is really up to scratch, but we'll still offer you a solo deal. And I was kind of idealistic and said, no, it's the band or nothing. So they said, okay, well, at the moment we can't do that then, but we will keep our eye on things and see how it develops. So we actually went and did our own single independently on the same label that I dreamt up for the Northern Dream album, Smile Records. And we recorded a single called Teenage Archangel, and John Peel played that a lot on his programme. And he made it his record of the week in Sounds magazine that he used to do reviews in at that time. And EMI came back up again to see us and said, maybe not. They weren't really sure. And then we ended up playing at the Marquee in London, and a guy who was head of A&R at that time called Joop Visser came along and said, okay, we'll sign the band. So that was it. We got a deal, through those few gigs, and also with John Peel backing us, really saying, he thought we were worthwhile. The first experience of recording was in this place called Holy Ground in Wakefield, and it was literally a 2-track machine which you could bounce things from the left channel onto the right channel. So you end up with a mono mix, but you add another instrument each time you bounce from one channel to another, so you're mixing as you go, really. And that was the first experience of doing any proper recording other than just cassette machines at home. And then I started demoing for the band. All the demos I did for Bebop were done on 2 cassette machines, where I'd record a rhythm guitar part on one and then play it through the speaker, set the other one in to record and add a guitar part to it, and then add a vocal and so on. So it was all very primitive and, really lo-fi stuff. And then that jump from suddenly getting a record deal and going into somewhere like Abbey Road was quite a shock, The second album we recorded in Rockfield Studios in Wales with Roy Thomas Baker producing. And after that, that was the second album, I thought that the production thing wasn't, some mysterious thing that we couldn't handle ourselves, really. And I'd had a sort of a difficult experience working with Roy Thomas Baker. So I asked EMI if it was possible for me to produce the next album, and they said, you're not really experienced enough, but we've got an engineer who is ready to make the move to becoming a producer. Perhaps if we put the two of you together and you worked as a team, you could co-produce, each of you taking half of the responsibility. So that turned out to be John Leckie, who has since made a big name for himself with a lot of well-known bands, and John and I started producing together as a team at Abbey Road. And then at one point we actually decided that we would like to sort of record in an environment rather than in a dead studio. And we hired a villa in the south of France that had never been used for recording before, and we took the Rolling Stones mobile recording truck down there and set all the equipment up in a really nice antique French drawing room in this villa, and recorded. We spent 7 weeks, I think, recording the basic tracks for an album called Drastic Plastic there, recorded out on the lawn, on balconies overlooking the sea, and just had a really good time sort of exploring what this particular building could do to the sound of the band. And then again with John, I recorded in my village hall an album called Quit Dreaming, Get on the Beam, using the Stones truck again, and we hired this wooden hut in the village I lived in at the time, and set all the gear. It was just John and myself. I played all the instruments and John did all the recording in the truck. But we had to move everything one night a week for the Ladies Keep Fit class to come in. So, and the vicar brought the Boy Scouts around to have a tour of, what we were doing. But that was a really pleasant experience, because we just the two of us, and we'd just work until, it got dark, and then stroll back down the lane to my house and have dinner. So we've done, all kinds of different recording environments. But at the moment, for the last 15 years, I've been recording at home, entirely on my own at home, with analog gear and now with digital hard drive stuff. But it can be frustrating because it's a small space and there's only ever me there to play anything. But on the other hand, it can be very sort of satisfying because there's the ultimate in control and self-indulgence, if you like. I don't ever give a thought to whether it's going to mean anything to anybody else other than to myself. So that's a real luxury. I don't do cut and paste, although it's capable of doing that. If I want to change something, I actually erase the part and replay it, and I play everything in real time. There's no sequencing as such. There's some drum machine sequencing, or drum patterns, but even a lot of the drum overdubs I'm playing either from pads or on the keyboard in real time. Everything else is played real time. So I treat it as if it's an analog recorder and just drop in if I need to repair anything, rather than copy it from somewhere and move it down. I mean, as you know, people do write songs by literally just throwing lots of ideas onto the hard drive and then chopping them up and assembling them in different ways. And it's a very common way of working now, but it does tend to sort of produce a certain style that I feel is generic, and I think by working the way that I do, which is purely my own personal approach, it always sounds like me. It's never going to sound like anybody else, and I think that's perhaps a good thing in some ways, because it sets you apart from the standard procedure or standard way of doing things. And the ideas keep coming for some reason. I don't know, exactly why that would be. I don't think it's too good to question that, but I do go into the studio every day, almost every day, and try and do something, or make a mark on the canvas, as it were, and push it around and see where it goes. And eventually I have lots of things that are sitting there, and an album will emerge. You'll suddenly see that and that are connected in some way, and this one would fit between them, and before you know it, you realise that unconsciously you did have a concept somewhere that was waiting to come to life, and you've kind of felt around, and then suddenly it appears, and once you've got a few tracks that are working, then the direction comes clear, and you follow through and finish the album. After a lot of years of doing it, you do learn to sort of trust instincts to a certain degree. I think when you're younger, you're always thinking that maybe you don't really know enough about it, and that's not very good. And I mean, I still think that. I still think things aren't as good as I would like, but I think that the instinct is all I've got to hang on to, and that's the best way to do it. I started playing guitar from hearing Duane Eddy, that sort of twangy 50s, late 50s rock and roll, almost, it was pre-surf guitar music, but that kind of thing. And then the Shadows, and again, even as a kid, it was the visual look of a red Stratocaster, you know, that was appealing. I used to make them out of cardboard and mime in front of the mirror to the Shadows records, like a lot of kids did at that time, you know. So it's been a long and enduring relationship. I went kind of not off the guitar, but I relegated it to a back seat in the 80s because the technology suddenly came up for a lot of interesting stuff with synths and keyboard-oriented music, and I did get heavily into that, and the guitar took a back seat, and I was using things like guitar synths as well. And I think part of it was the fact that suddenly there was this palette of sounds available that I hadn't had access to before, but also because the language of rock guitar was very much set in stone, and it tended to you know, many guitar players, when they went out to impress an audience, it kind of got into the area of sort of over dramatized, you know, histrionic playing, you know, and I didn't enjoy that side of it much. I remember us touring in America with bands like Blue Oyster Cult and Ted Nugent, and it was all overkill, loud, heavy metal guitar stuff, you know. And we'd come on and we'd be doing a thing with a piece at that time called Adventures in a Yorkshire Landscape. And it was like a pastoral thing in waltz time, you know. And we tended then, when we were in America, to sort of amp it up a bit more because we were working with audiences who really weren't sort of attuned to anything other than, you know, number 11 on the amp and people running around the stage in spandex and screaming their heads off, you know. So it was a bit strange for us. But the synth thing took me away from it for a while, and then I got back into it in the last 10-15 years very much more, so I've kind of rekindled my love affair with guitars, you know. And the thing about guitars is, for me, is that there's a visual aspect as well. I mean, I tend to play more guitars on stage than I need to play. It's just that each one has a personality or a character, and it's good for the audience to see them, I think. I could get away with 2 or 3 throughout a whole set, but at the moment I'm using 13 or 14 guitars throughout the set, and each one, while some of them may not sound very much different from each other, the very moment you pick it up it feels different, so it puts you playing in a slightly different direction, and the look of it will give you a certain, you know, psychological vibe, and that informs the music as well. You couldn't imagine a saxophone player going on stage with 14 saxophones because they look very much the same, you know. But guitars have got this wonderful ability to look quite different and quite bizarre and quirky as well. So that appeals to me about them, as well as the sound, you know. Live gigs can be quite, you know, they can flatten you and make you lose faith and so on. And I think that may always have been the case to some point, even back in the 70s. But then we had quite a solid infrastructure. I mean, we used to tour with 2 Arctics and loads of equipment and huge crew and our own lighting team and everything, you know. And we were spoiled to a degree, so everything could be a little bit more focused and less left to chance. So now I kind of, you know, worry about, is there a danger of spoiling people's memories by doing something that isn't to standard, and that's always a consideration for me, and one of the reasons perhaps why I don't accept every opportunity that might come my way to play live, because I worry about it being up to snuff, you know. But sometimes, you know, it can be surprising, you know, and you can get a real lift from it occasionally. So I can't give it up completely, I guess, but I think sometimes, you know, I've gone through that thing where I thought, well, if I could just keep recording and because I love recording, I love making records. If I could keep releasing albums and that would sustain me and keep people satisfied, I'd be absolutely happy. I don't think I'd ever miss going out and playing live, but it's not necessarily a good thing, you know. Maybe I should occasionally go out there and do something, so keep trying. I've never recorded, perhaps since the first album onwards, with the thought of how do we reproduce this live. It's always been the studio is one thing and live is a totally different thing, and so there's always a problem translating studio work to the stage. So most of the choices are based around how easy they are or practical they are to play live, rather than, you know, saying, well, I really love that song, it'd be great to do that, because that song may be impossible. Even when the band I had in the 70s, Bebop Deluxe, was recording, we never could reproduce entire albums. We'd just pick certain tracks that were doable, but there are often tracks on albums, many tracks on albums, we couldn't possibly play in a live situation at all, unless we'd have expanded the band hugely, you know, which wouldn't have been possible. And the other thing is, the other difficulty is trying to find songs I can still feel I can get inside that headspace, because a lot of the songs that were popular with fans now feel to me juvenile and sort of naive, and I find it hard to get inside them again. So it's trying to find something I can relate to as well now and give it some sense of truth. And anything that just feels too embarrassingly wrong, I can't tackle. I just, you know, no matter how many people want to hear it, it's always a no, you know, I can't do that anymore. They're very loyal, as you said. I've got fans from all over the place, from all over the world, and the website's a great sort of meeting place for them that I've set up. And we have, I mean, I don't play live often for the reasons that I've mentioned before, but I've done for the last 10 years a fan convention every year, which has got more and more elaborate as the years have gone on. This last year's was the 10th one, and we held it over 2 days, and we have people come from America and from Europe and from Japan, as well as from England. And for instance, this year they got 3 separate performances: a solo performance, a trio performance, and a 7-piece band performance. And they get a free CD, free DVD, meet and greet. There's auctions of my artwork. There's raffles. We had one guitar which I'd painted. Was a raffle prize, star prize this year. And they're great. They're just coming. It's a social occasion as well. Everybody knows each other now, and we get a lot of them coming, and they have a good time.